I'm doing my makeup today for the Classic Essence, which is my dominant essence in a system by John Kitchener that explains what he calls a balance of yin and yang and the various effects that different facial features give off. There are already so many videos on the internet about this, so I won't go into detail, but if you have not heard of this, Ellie Jean Royden has some good examples on this topic. There's not really a specific primer that's needed for Classic Essence, just whatever makes the most sense for your skin. Since it's the winter, I'm using a moisturizing primer. Even though my skin is usually more oily, it is not around this time of year. Even though in general, Classic Essence is pretty easy to do makeup for, it's like the Mr. Rogers of all the essences. Like, I like you just the way you are. You are already balanced and you barely need to do anything. One of the harder parts is that because you're already so balanced and even looking, having a color that's slightly off is really, really noticeable, more than it would be on most people. So out of almost any essence, it's probably the most important to find foundation and concealer that match your skin tone well. And it doesn't need to be anything super heavy, more just whatever works for your skin type. But I have noticed that people who know what they're doing with makeup blend and then blend some more. So I've started doing that and I do notice a difference. It does seem to be more natural looking. Personally, I think it's helpful to do foundation before concealer because you might not actually need as much concealer as you think once you already have the layer of foundation down. So just a small amount of concealer wherever you need it on next. Again, just keeping it minimal and balanced looking, which is basically the theme for Classic Essence in general and with makeup. I would personally just keep a really small amount around the eyes to cover dark spots, but nothing too heavy because, again, on Classic Essence, a lot of makeup can look really cakey. And Classic is my primary essence, but I also have Romantic Essence and Ingenue Essence, which means I am very yin looking for a Classic Essence person. So keep that in mind with the rest of this video, that I might do things that are more rounded or more towards the yin side, and if your balance is different, you may need to edit things slightly so that it's not as romantic or ingenue leading. And I've also found that I have to put setting powder under my eyes right away or else it ends up creasing, which again, those things can be kind of noticeable for people with Classic Essence. But if you don't have that issue, this step doesn't really need to come next. I've just found that I personally need to do this to avoid the creasing. Once that is set, can start with a really small amount of liquid blush. So it's, again, natural looking, looks balanced. The main idea behind Classic makeup is just slightly enhancing all of the facial features rather than having a main focus. Because our features are really balanced already, so there's no need to balance anything or try not to make things unbalanced by doing makeup. It's more about just making everything look a little bit more polished. So I would keep the blush amount small. I will go over again later with a powder blush, but I found that creating the layers actually does something, because when the blush looks like it's coming from underneath the powder, it tends to be more of a natural looking glow rather than being able to see the layers really easily. And now, you have guessed it, a very minimal amount of bronzer, as there is a very minimal amount of everything. That is kind of the point. And if you learned nothing else from this, maybe just less is more. At least for Classic Essence. If you have maybe Gamine or Dramatic in your blend, you might be able to handle a little bit more. But especially if Classic is easily your primary essence, definitely less is more. Once I have that blended in just on the cheekbone and side of the face, I'll go take the excess and put it along the jawline, starting in the two little areas that have the most shadow. A, because I can't stand wasting makeup or anything really, and B, because it gives it just a really slight, subtle contour that doesn't look overwhelming or harsh. By now, this should be looking not a whole ton different from just your natural face, but a bit more enhanced, polished, and like all of your features just have a little something extra to them, which keeps them in balance. Like, we already have very balanced and moderate features, so we don't want to mess with that balance. Just add an extra bit of enhancement to all of them. So now, once it's mattified, we can start doing the powder products. I'm a big fan of color seasons in general. I think they're helpful for everyone, but most especially if Classic Essence is your dominant essence, because there's not a whole ton of contrast or drama there. So wearing a color that's against your natural coloring would be even more noticeable. So for me, as a soft summer, I get blush that's neither dark nor light, something that's extremely muted, and something that is slightly cool but leaning neutral. Other ladies with Classic Essence don't necessarily need that same type of color, but just whatever makes the most sense for your season. So if you're a winter or spring, something brighter could really suit you, and it wouldn't look harsh or dramatic against your features. And then it's the same with the powder contour, just right on the cheekbone, side of the face, the same places where we already put the liquid bronzer. And then for me, something that's a medium cool toned brown, and for you, whatever the most fits with your color season. I would say for shapes, let your essences guide you, but then for colors, let your color season guide you. So looking at this with Classic Essence, I would pay more attention to the shapes and amount of makeup, and for colors, just use your color season. I think eyebrows are a pretty good example of color versus shape, because I'm using this cool toned brown as a soft summer, and then it's just a brow tint. It's pretty simple, keeping similarly to the natural shape of my eyebrows. So you could use whatever color most suits your color season, not necessarily this one, and then a similar shape with an eyebrow tint. I find brightening the inner corners with a lighter color, like a white for me, is helpful, and then also with a pale pink underneath the eye, just to slightly brighten everything. And then for the eyelid, I'm using a bronze color, and overall eye colors can be pretty similar to natural eye colors, just something that enhances the overall look and draws a bit more attention to the eye. Most people with Classic Essence might honestly want to use a matte color, where I used a shimmer because of Romantic and Ingenue being my secondary essences. I always curl my eyelashes because my secondary essence is Romantic, and that definitely helps for a Romantic essence. Not everyone might want to do this, but if your secondary essences are more yin leaning, I would recommend doing it, but you might be able to skip this step depending on your personal preference in your blend. I admit that I am breaking my own advice with this mascara because it is black, and with my color season I would usually use dark brown, but this is my only waterproof mascara, and this day was actually me getting ready for church. And another great look for Classic Essence is not having mascara and tear stains all over your face, so that's why that one. I find blinking a few times to apply mascara helpful, but I do feel that's more of a Romantic Essence tip than a Classic Essence tip, but it couldn't hurt to experiment with that and see if it still looks balanced on you. We'll finish off with some neutral lip oil here. This won't mess with the color palette that we already have, but it'll give it that little bit of shine which depending on your essence blend, you might want to go for chapstick instead. But again, for the yin leaning essence blends, lip oil or lip gloss can be good. And then just finish off with some setting spray so that this stays in place. I didn't realize I looked that dramatic when I put on setting spray, but here we are. And that's the final look.